without further ado, everybody, Mr. Brad Puette.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. It's a cool experience for me to get to do this. I grew up mixing on an SSL. That's where I learned how to mix. So a return to home for me is awesome. I've been mixing in the box pretty much for the last 6 years pretty consistently. So always fun to get back on it. And so because of that, I'm going to take some of the liberties of using the console that we can. So I'm not going to do a lot of stuff in Pro Tools. And some of the tricks Benny went over, unfortunately. I don't know if we'll have time to jump through. What I wanted to kind of highlight was what we can do with the analog console, what we can do with simple concepts like EQ and compression to get our drums to have a whole new life. I think there's a myth that we need special things, right? Like special things to add harmonics and all these things that we're taught to believe about how to achieve a good balance in your mix. And I think with just simple EQ and compression, you'd be amazed the amount of tone you can really get from that. So that's what I kind of really want to dive into. So we'll jump up. So the track I pulled in today, a good friend of mine is a guy named Marcus Allen Ward, Cleveland guitar player, jazz fusion kind of style, really heavy rock influence kind of stuff. And I will start off by saying this. What we're dealing with here are acoustic drums, right? So these were recorded, mic'd up, physical things. A lot of this stuff might not be the case for digital drums. The way I EQ and compress for acoustic stuff really is a lot different than what I would do in a digital world. In a digital world, we're used to having things a lot more even, right? Like if you get a kick track, right, it's probably not looking like my kick track does here, right, which is a lot of transients. In different volumes, right? I mean, I recorded through a compressor coming in, but we're getting a lot of variance. So I'm using my compressor for what it's built for, right, to even it out, to make it a less dynamic performance. In electronic stuff, I don't have to do that, right? Everything is evened out, right? What I'm using a compressor for in that light is more of a tone shaper than what I'd really be doing here, which I'm trying to even out a performance. So I think keep some of those things in mind too if you're mostly working off of digital tracks. We're dealing with some different stuff. But let me play you guys a little bit of the tracks so you know what we're kind of dealing with here. So it's kind of like a two-part track. The first part is all digital. It's all live instrumentation, but the drums especially were all digital, and then we moved into a whole live kit, acoustic kind of feel. So I'll play you kind of the end of the digital track and then into the acoustic stuff that we're actually going to be working on. That's kind of the vibe of more or less what we're going for. So you can tell from Marcus's sound, it's really ambient, right? Like he loves lots of different textures, especially with the vocals. So I knew for me, one of the focuses of what I was trying to do here was create simple driving drums that were really clean. I wanted to do some dirty stuff on some parallel buses, which I ended up doing. But I wanted all of those reverb channels, everything that is floating above in that mix to stay up top. So that was kind of my goal with what happened. So that's some context for what the song is. So let's just start going through the kit, and I'll kind of walk through channel by channel what I was doing, and kind of create it in an analog kind of field. That being said, when I did mix this, it was all in the box, and I was using all SSL EQs, so it's not that different from what we were actually going through in the process of it. So let's listen to just the drums here. And I'll start after the kind of snare build up here. Maybe we can go into... So I've got kick in, kick out, which I'm using mostly for the sub on it. Snare top and snare bottom, right? Snare top I'm getting a lot of body from, snare bottom mostly on my top end, getting right the crack from that. Toms 1 and 2, edited by the way, right? So we saved that whole process. I am, on that note too, I always kind of go through, I like to clean out a lot of the dead space in between my toms. This is a personal choice, definitely from engineer to engineer. In something like this where I wanted something really, really super tight, you'd be amazed at how a tom mic will affect the way your snare sounds drastically. Not just as far as where its positioning is and what you perceive as the center, but tonality wise. So any decision I'm now trying to make on my snare, I'm also trying to make with my toms. Again, we're dealing with live microphones, right? They're all picking up each other's stuff. So that's why I'm gonna go ahead and go through and clean it out. So like these 2 tracks here, right, are my tom tracks, right? And you can see I kind of went through, cut out all the dead space, did my crossfades, and keeping it sound natural. Now, if I was doing like a jazz song, obviously not the right application to be doing that kind of stuff, right? We're trying to keep it a little more even. So yeah, so 2 tom tracks, stereo overheads. I just did a space pair on the overheads. Mostly with the goal of trying to capture cymbals. You can hear I kind of rolled off a lot of the low end on it. Really just trying to capture what's happening with the cymbals. And then I've got a room mic. Yeah.
I know we're not supposed to be asking questions yet.
Go for it.
But I got a burning question.
Yeah.
What mics did you use?
Oh, cool. So kick in was D112. Kick out, I think I used a U87, and I pulled back like a 10 dB pad on it, so I'm not clipping it. Snare top was, what is the model of that Neumann? It's the handheld Neumann. Yes. No, not the KM84. Those are the pencil ones. It's a handheld. Dang, the name escapes me. Awesome on snare drums.
I can't think of it either.
You know what I'm talking about though?
Yeah, I know exactly.
Telefunken makes obviously the same one.
I love the Telefunken version.
It's killer on snare drums. Other than that, I would probably 9 times out of the only reason I use it is because the studio had it, and like no studios really ever do. Normally I'm using an SM57. Yeah. Snare bottom was a 57. The toms were both 414s, or 421s. 421s on the toms. My overheads were 414s. And the room was a Bach he had at that studio. A 47 Bach, I believe. And yeah, so that's what I was kind of running through. So my room mic too, which is right where we were at, I kind of, this record, we wanted the end of this to be really open, really big. So I took that microphone and I threw it up into the farthest corner of that room as I could get it, as high up as I could get it. I was really just trying to capture basically a bird's eye view of what that might sound like. And I moved it to 3 different positions after I kind of set it up, listening to it. But I kept it in mono. I've done a bunch of different stuff with room mics. I think room mics in an acoustic drum kit are super important. Like I'll play you even just like once we get through it with and without the room mic. It brings a sense of realness that's really, you can't kind of replicate that, especially with reverbs and stuff, which I think a lot of people try to do. And my approach too is to try to get these individual drums to sound as tight as they can individually. So my room mic has become my realness glue, as I like to think about it. It kind of blends those seams of everything I've kind of gone through and edited out. So yeah, so I'm not doing anything really all that different in this mix. I think the only other kind of trick I was running with this was I did run a parallel bus, which I've set up. We can kind of incorporate at the end. Basically sending my entire mix just through a parallel to a different compressor that I'm gonna kind of crush and kind of get all gritty and then blend back up into it. So we'll do that kind of at the end. So traditionally, I think what I would normally be doing is mixing this along with the stems. I think that's a mistake a lot of us make too, is we get into solo world, right, where we're trying to individually perfect certain things, and that's not how anybody's gonna end up listening to your record. So with that in mind, I'll keep my stems low, probably lower than I normally would, but yeah, I'm pretty much an all-in kind of mixer. I'm trying to etch away at a bigger piece. I'm not trying to take individual parts and make them perfect and slam them together, right? So my kind of approach for sure. So let's go through it. Something solo. Where nothing's lit up. All right, so here's the drums, right? So my first thing to always do is levels and pans mix first, right? I'm always gonna try to get a rough feel of how I want the drums to sit with each other, which is kind of how I've kind of gotten them at this point. From this point on, I'm kind of gonna go from kick drum up and just start EQing and compressing. I'll kind of walk through what I'm doing. Let me know if you have trouble hearing me. I'll kind of try to yell as I'm going through it. So I'm gonna start with the kick. Main goal here with the kick is I'm trying to pull out of these mids. That's where we get a lot of that cardboard flappy kind of nonsense that we don't like. So I'm gonna be listening for stuff probably like in the 700 to 900 range, trying to find some things in there I don't like. Same thing in my low mids too, probably 300 to 600 kind of range. I'm looking for stuff I just don't like. I'm very much always a cut the things out I don't like kind of EQ kind of guy, but in drums you gotta add, right? We're gonna do more kind of shaping and carving with drums than we do with vocals for sure, and most other instruments. So, but either way, I'm always gonna cut first and then I'm gonna start to add in the stuff I do like. So first things first, I'm gonna pull out the mid range and then I'll start adding in you'll hear the highs come in and then the lows come in. All right, so the EQ's going in now, nothing on it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set for a really narrow Q and I'm gonna kind of sweep for the stuff in the upper mids that I don't like. Right, hear that that pull out, right? Once I find what I don't like, I'm gonna pull it back out and then kind of widen out my bell. Do the same thing on the low mids. So here with just those two cuts, how the lows seem to have come up and your highs seem to have come up, and I've added no EQ to top at all. So we're gonna play with that perception, right? And now I can kind of go in and enhance the stuff I don't like, I do like. So let's add some top into it. Boosting right around like 4K. Trying to get that beater hitting the head. And then let's add some lows, probably around like 80, 90 hertz. So here's the kick. That's with the EQ. That's without it. Right, so hear all the mid-range in there? I'm cutting mid-range. Hear that? Yeah, so that's cutting mid-range and adding some top. So I basically cut, at this point I've cut around 800 hertz by about 3 dB, 300 hertz by about 3 dB, and I'm boosting 80 hertz by about 3 dB, and about 4K up by 3 dB too. I'm trying to get with this mic, I'm trying to get more of the top end knock to it. I'm gonna get all my sub for my kick out, right? Yeah. And now I've got two faders that I can play with that. So in my mix, if I want a punchier kick, I could bring my kick out down. If I want something that's a little bass heavier, I can use more of my kick out mic. So my kick out mic, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm not really gonna be trying to do the same thing I did with the kick in and accentuate top and pull out mid range, right? It's all about the low end for me there. I'm using that whole channel as just like a low end supplement for myself. So if I feel like the kick's not giving enough on the low end, I've got a fader I can pull up easily, right? So let's do that. So I'm gonna roll off a little bit of lows too. I'm gonna probably roll off everything underneath about 20. And the reason being, I just wanna get rid of any of that garbage low end stuff that we can't really audibly hear, but it's gonna end up screwing up my mix, especially because what I'm about to do is boost a lot of the lows. And I don't wanna edit any more of that super sub that's just gonna kind of lend into muddy up my bass tracks and other stems I might have kind of rocking in there. So let's boost some lows here. Same thing, probably around 80 hertz.
So are you rolling off your kick out on the high end?
Yep. On the high end, no. I mean, I did on the recording end of things. Okay. Yeah. Like you can hear, I've got nothing above, like, I don't know, probably 400 hertz in there. Yeah. I mean, the whole goal of that was to do subs. So this was a big Ludwig kick, had a huge, I think it was like a huge, like 20 something inch. It was monster kick, yeah. And we went through, we recorded the drums on this track 3 different times. We used a jazz kit, tried to get a real punchy sound. Marcus hated it. We used like a Tama Rockstar, trying to get like a real grungy, dirty kind of thing. Marcus hated it. And yeah, we want something huge. Yeah, go for it.
I'm just curious about your choice of mics. You
Sure.
said for the out, you did
Yeah.
87, and you were talking about how much you want the low end. Why wouldn't you go like with a dynamic?
You could.
That proximity.
You could. And I have, for sure. I think the softness of what I'm trying to do with the condenser, I'm not really trying to capture transients like I am on my kick in. It's not weighing as much importance to me. So sometimes I want that warmth like a U87 would do.
So it doesn't have to be as punchy. It has to be.
Yeah, I'm really trying to get a lot of that bottom. Yeah, and like obviously making sure the U87's got a crazy roll off on it, right? So we want to make sure that that's not engaged because then we're losing everything we're trying to capture. And a lot of that's trial and error too, and what you're trying to achieve from the sound. I knew that like honestly, like in this mix, I'm using most of my kick in to get most of that punch. The bottom wasn't super important. He had other stems. We had pads, we had bass, we had sub bass, we had other things that were going to occupy my low end. So for me, the punch of the kick was what was really important. So I was using that kick out mic really as like a warmth thing in addition to the low end, which can get kind of gross in kicks, you know? So yeah, does that help you with that? Yeah.
That helps a lot because I thought that you wanted something with proximity effect.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I mean, like, and like, you know, that's a great thing too. And like, man, I don't think there's any wrong answer for that, you know. Yeah, that can definitely be helpful too, and I'm sure that's kind of a popular application too, especially if you want something super girthy. I mean, this kick, you can hear it on its own. Like, it's nonsense. It's so deep, you know, and that's just from the size of the drum itself. So I wasn't really trying to, I mean, not that, you know, using your proximity is like fake, but it's you're enhancing something that's not naturally there, right? I didn't really feel the need to do that.
So the drum was already a punchy, big.
Oh yeah.
Already.
Oh yeah.
So you didn't really have to add more to that.
You
actually wanted to make it more balanced.
Absolutely, and also keeping in mind, which was really important, was how it was going to ultimately live in my mix. I didn't need the super deep thing. We wanted it for the, like you said, kind of that John Bonham-y open feel to it, but I wasn't using it to occupy my low end. I wasn't using it to fill out my low end. My low end was there.
You already had the low end. You just needed it to kind of be there.
Yeah. Right. And so now that's what I have is I've got two independent things for my kick, so I can blend it. So obviously I'm going to go for more of a punchy tone. My kick in is going to be up a lot hotter than my kick out is. And so we can hear all the kick sounds in there with everything else. Cool. So I am using a distressor down here on the kick as well, which I think I have in. On the kick in, I have it. I know obviously you guys can't see it, but just so you understand what I'm doing, I'm compressing probably anywhere from 1 to 3 dB on that. My attack is like super out. I think I'm at a 9. My release is down at a 2.5. The goal with that compressor, what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to tame that transient. That's the last thing I want to do is get rid of the punch that my kick in is already created. So what I'm trying to do is if you think about what a transient of a kick drum is, you get that nice big pop up front, right? And then it quickly dies off and goes down. I'm trying to take that part and get it up. So I'm letting that transient sneak through with my really slow attack and then grabbing it, right? And letting it go. And I think I've got my release at like a 3. So pretty quick release too because the part's quick, right? Like his kicks are coming really quick. So I got to let it out before the next one comes back in. So a little bit of compression with the distressor I like there too. Also running the snare down through the distressor as well, which we'll jump into next here. So snare top and snare bottom. And so we can hear the crack right on the snare bottom. We're going to use that for any high end I want to add in. Just like I was doing with my kick, how I've got fader blend between tones, I can do that as well there. Yeah, go for it.
Do you have a theory or an idea as to what you'd rather have for like a snare top and a snare bottom, or what you prefer?
Mic wise? You know, as simple as it is, I love the 57. I love it on both. I used to Sennheiser an E604. It's a flat guy, right? Silver front. That's pretty cool on the snare bottom. I also liked it because it was flat and skinny, and you could like slide it right in and keep it parallel with the drum, which I liked a lot because phase is really obviously important when we're doing that, right? So getting in the right position was easy with the 604. Yeah, I'm a simple guy though, 57.
It's a cop out if when I'm recording drums at home, I just use 257.
No. No. I've worked out of some I've been fortunate enough to work out of some pretty beautiful studios in my life that have all of the most expensive microphones you could imagine. And I would cut drums and still pull out the 57s, yeah. And honestly, I know we're not talking about guitars, but I'll do that too. 57s on guitars are some of my absolute favorite mics for that application. So yeah, how nice the mic is almost irrelevant if it's the right mic. The right mic is what's important, you know?
Thank you for answering my question.
Absolutely. So that's the snare bottom, snare top. So I'm gonna kill my room mic and my overheads real quick, my toms. So we're gonna add a little bit of verb. We probably already got a send kind of going for that. I'm just running through the PCM 81, or 91, right? I think is what we switched to, yeah.
That's a reverb.
Little reverb. The snare's the only one I'm gonna send anything into reverb with. Personal preference of mine, I kind of loathe kicks with reverb on them. People like those. If that's your thing, I'm not here to stop you. So, you know, do your thing. For me, again, the tightness of the drums is really what I was trying to battle with here.
Do you have a specific delay time that you like to use for the reverbs on certain drums, or do they
Nope.
change?
Yeah, it's all changed. I've never been like a template guy to begin with. I think everything you add into a mix should be very purposeful, like very intentional. And I think we get wrapped into a world with templates where we kind of just apply it because it's there. So no, I mean, I might have routing set up and stuff like that, but no, I mean, I'm listening because every song's different, right? The timing of when the snares are coming, how quick the patterns are, how big we want that reverb to feel, all changes song to song. So yeah, keep your options open, especially like in your brain. You know what I mean? All right, cool. So let's iron some of this stuff out a little bit. So we got a little bit of reverb on the snare. I'm gonna roll off some of the lows here again. Probably taking out everything below 100, 120. I'm gonna boost some top end in this first. 5K is generally a sweet spot we can kind of start at in a snare to kind of get that top end crack out of it.
Snare top, right?
Snare top, yeah. We're gonna end up doing a lot of top boost in both the snare top and bottom. The reason being we're just trying to add some more of that sizzle. I think the important thing to keep in mind with your snare top is I think a lot of people want to boost top. In your snare top and boost top in it is you want that crack, but there's so much body that ends up happening inside your snare drum. So pay attention to your mid-range and your snare drum, especially your low mids, which you think are inconsequential in a snare. And that's where your depth is. So a lot of these tones too, these were all run through EQs and compressors obviously coming into. So we did a lot of this tone shaping on the in. So the stuff I'm gonna be doing here will be lighter because for me that snare gave me what I wanted. It gave me body and it gave me sizzle. And that's what I'm looking for here. So what I'm gonna probably end up doing is cutting some upper mids. I might boost a little bit of the lows depending how it ends up sitting in the snare top. Probably around like 250, 300 and minimal boosting there. I'm not trying to create muddiness down there. Snare bottom, I'm really gonna roll off everything probably below 300, 400 hertz, which is already done in the recording for me. And then I'm gonna add a lot more top end to it just to kind of get it to bite through. The snare top, I'm gonna be compressing again through the distressor. Similar kind of trains of thought with what was happening with the kick, although I'll probably, my guess is I'll probably end up attacking it a little bit quicker. But let's see how it goes.
No hi-hat mic, right?
Huh?
No hi-hat mic.
No, I don't have any hi-hat mic here. The part, if you listen to the whole part, he's not doing any.
There's no solid timekeeping.
It's not any kind of purpose for that. If this was a R&B track, something like that, yeah, he was all cymbals. Everything was cymbals. So, and honestly, I probably did record a hi-hat mic and then just trashed it in the mix. Yeah. I end up doing that a lot. I think I rely on my overheads more for a lot of that stuff. So I'm real meticulous in my placement to make sure that I'm getting my snare to feel in the middle of my overheads, so that when I rely on them in my mix, I have something to fall back on. All right, so let's do a little top end on the snare. I'm gonna pull out some mids here. It's really that ring I'm after. And then I'm gonna kind of make up for it on my low. So I'm gonna go to like, let's try around 200 with a bell.
Any more reverb on the snare top?
Yeah, this is snare top. Yeah.
What frequency was
I'm right around probably like 320. Yeah, and I'm boosting right below it, which is kind of contradictory. But here, let me pull it out. You can hear the tone go away, right? I think the other thing to keep in mind too is like how we're gain staging this coming back in. If I'm louder will always sound better for you, right? So be very mindful about when you're bringing stuff back in, that when you compare, your A-Bing with it in, with it out, to see if we like it, make sure that there's not just like 3 dB of mythical gain there. That's now making you like it better because it's louder. Louder will always sound better. I don't care how well you train your ear, louder will always sound better. Yeah. So be very conscious of that. Like as I'm adding the distressor in and I'm playing with my output, I'm trying to match my input was coming in. I'm comparing apples to apples here, right? I want to know what that disstressor's doing. I'm not trying for any mind tricks here.
Could you go back to your parameters for the
Yeah, the snare top.
You mentioned you want a fast attack and a slow release?
No, other way around. Yeah, slow attack, quicker release. Yep, on both the kick and the snare. So I want my compressor to engage after my transients pass through it, right? You understand what I'm saying? So if I have a quick attack, it's going to suck that initial hit out of it, right? So in this case, the punch of that kick or the crack of that snare. If you look at these, and we can zoom in on them, right? If you look at any transients, right, we're getting loud quickly. Like it doesn't take a lot of time for this to, it's not a string, it's not a piano, right? So what I don't want to do is I don't want to chop this part off. If I've got a quick attack, that's what I'm going to lose, right? It's going to engage quickly and take away that and start compressing right away. What I want to happen is I want to let this guy through. I like this. This is my punch, right? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to compress this part, essentially, to feel the same, so like in a solid state as the front part does. I like the front part, and like you do too. I promise you do. The stuff you like in kicks and snares is that punch. If we kill that with a compressor immediately, we lose that. If your drums ever feel like they're not punching through, I guarantee your attacks are probably set too quick. You need to, drums are so percussive, you need to let those hits come through. That initial transient is super important. It's the back end we're really trying to squeeze up and lift up to the power of what's up front.
I'm a big fan of ring, especially in drums, to where it has a lot of sustain. So
okay.
Kind of release,
like you like?
I like a bit of ring.
Okay.
Every hit to have a little bit of that, but how fast does your release to allow that?
I think it probably depends on the sound. I think more so what your mic placement and how the snare itself is tuned is probably more important than anything else in that circumstance. I mean, you can listen and play with your release as to how much it's hanging on to. I would imagine you'd have a slower release at that point if you're trying to hang on to that, right? Like if your ring is probably going to be some of your softer sounds, right? So your compressor is going to bring those up. So having a slower release will allow them to hang on before they kind of dissipate away.
Yeah, I like that.
I'll have to ask you why, after this is over, why you like ring in your snare. You might be the first person ever, but it's cool.
Okay.
I'm into unique stuff. Cool. So yeah, when I'm compressing stuff, that's really what I'm going for. And if you think about all your drums, we're treating them the same way. Your toms are just smaller versions of your kick drums, right? Like they're all the same element here. So we're applying a lot of the same principles to them. And across the board, really, that's what I'm doing, especially with my EQs. I'm pulling out a lot of mids. I'm boosting the lows that I like. I'm adding a little bit of top. And I'm compressing in this very similar fashion, letting my transients come through, letting stuff punch, and using the compressors to kind of fill it out a little bit. All right, cool. So let's go through. I'll add in the snares we kind of worked on. We'll move on to the toms. As far as my panning goes, I've always been a fan of player perspective, and that is 100% a personal taste, right? I'm a huge air drummer, especially in my car. Don't get near me. So I like that. That is totally up to you. Just stay consistent, right? Like if you are going from player perspective, do not let me hear your overheads pan the opposite ways. Like stay true all the way through. So yeah. So that's how I'm kind of got it. So, in this kit, he had 2 toms. He had a rack tom and a floor tom. I'm going to pan it as if he was playing it. Yeah.
Can you explain how you cut the dead space?
Yeah, for sure. So, move over here. So we can see it here. Here's a tom hit, right? Oops, soloing in the wrong spot. So let's just, so what I'm doing is essentially like, and we can use any kind of track. So like, this is my snare track here, but let's just pretend it's my tom. So what I would do is like, because your tom track's gonna look a lot like this. Can you see it, by the way? Okay, cool. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end up chopping out stuff before it, right? I'm gonna put a little crossfade on at the top of it, and I'm gonna wait until essentially, you know, if there was, like, and this was a high tom, I'd probably see a snare hit in there, and I'm gonna chop it right before that snare hit. You gotta be careful editing, and super mindful of how it affects the overall feel of your drums. But yeah, so like I would probably cut before this next hit, do a nice long crossfade on it, and get rid of this next hit, right? And I'm kind of doing that along to each hit as they come.
You're doing that to like minimize the bleed, right?
Yeah, yep. And like, you know, if you're like the kind of guy that loves to, girl that loves to do gates, go for it. I mean, I'm not really doing anything different than what a gate would do, except I'm editing it as opposed to relying on something that can kind of be there. So I can see it, I can fine tune it, as opposed to a gate might be a little bit less reliable. But yeah, I think, you know, for me, that's always been a style I've liked to do with my toms, because it allows my snare to, the things I'm doing to my snare to just be to my snare. All right, cool. So let's go through some toms. Let's get to where the toms actually come in. All right, so here are my two tom tracks. Right, so you can hear that. I'm just letting the hit through. I'm kind of suffocating it after that.
You're not letting a lot of sustain on it.
Yeah. You can get totally burned doing that too. So like, I cannot emphasize that enough. Be super, super mindful of how it feels coming back into your whole mix. If you can hear the toms coming in and out, go back to the drawing board and start being more careful with where you're cutting and where you're fading through, because that's something that can kill that natural feel that we're going to use the room light to supplement if we do this part wrong. So my toms, we're going to do these both kind of the same kind of way. Again, I'm going to be cutting a lot of mids here. 500, 600 range, definitely for sure. So let's do this, and let's just be super annoying and just loop a tom hit. All right, cool. So let's sweep, again, you know, I'm going to be sweeping for it. I'm going to cut it about probably between 3 and 6 dB, so probably 4.5.
So you like to apply the seek and destroy method on the toms?
Absolutely. I apply seek and destroy pretty much to everything. Additive EQ can be like, we're doing some sort of additive EQ, right? Like we're adding some tops, we're adding some low. You can get into gain trouble really quick with additive EQ. Now something that was recorded at a good level is now peaky. Now you're playing with output trims.
There might be some frequencies that may have been boosted because you added so many things
Totally.
that you don't want.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm much rather, let me get rid of the things I don't like. And I'm always going to get rid of the things I don't like first. And then if I feel like it's lacking, okay, let's go through and add. And I know for my drums, like I'm doing more adding here than I'll do in any other instrument group across the board. My drums are going to get more positive boosting in my EQ.
They cover a large frequency range.
And you have to carve a lot of them to get them to sound the way we want drums to sound. And I'm sure you guys have learned this. Setting up mics in front of a drum kit doesn't make them sound like you want your drums to sound.
Move around a lot.
Yeah.
You have to try out a lot of things.
Absolutely, and then I think it's a lot of trial and error. And it's a lot of this. It's a lot of dissecting. I mean, we do more. I'll never do this kind of carving to a vocal. Like if I get a really great vocal recording, I'm trying to do minimal things to that vocal because I want it to be what it was. In drums, that's not always the case. So like these drums too, like I quantize these. I beat detected them, right? We lined them all up. They're perfectly quantized down to the hits. It's like we really edited the living F out of these drums, right? That was the intent. Again, if this was a jazz song, I'd be fired. So know your genre, like know what you're trying to, like know what you're really trying to achieve. Typically what I'll do with toms too is I'll pull out like an EQ or some sort of frequency analyzer that lets me know exactly where that tom is resonating at. Stuff like the Fab Filter, Pro Q is great for that. Shows you you know, roughly where your core kind of hit is on that. That's what I want to try to boost. Yeah, so I like that kind of stuff. Here we're gonna use our ears because that's what we have and that's our best tool anyway. So let's figure out where we want to boost. So I'm gonna go ahead and be annoying again and do the solo tom thing.
How when you start to subtract, how wide is your cue?
Narrow.
Narrow.
Yeah, I'm like probably at, I don't know what the clock would be. What is that? Like,
Oh.
sure. No, not 11. Maybe like, yeah, between 9 and 10. Yeah. I don't have real wide cues in this stuff. Again, I did a lot of grunt work on the recording end of things too. So we were pretty meticulous about how we were shaping them coming in, knowing how we wanted to sit. Yeah. I'm huge on the way in. I want things to sound as perfect as I can get them as a recording engineer, because then when I'm playing the role of the mixing engineer, I'm going to be thanking myself, right? Because I've ironed out problems. I took the time to get rid of that stuff.
Less work on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that, but like I've now got a better starting point. Like I'm now starting at a B and I can get it to an A pretty quickly, as opposed to getting something that's recorded at a D with that kind of mentality and now trying to like force my way into it. If you look at your Pro Tools sessions and you've seen 6, 7, 8 plugins stacked in a row, work backwards. Yeah, work backwards because you're probably starting to do too much.
So do you spend a lot of time on the recording process?
Absolutely.
To where exactly where you want
If time and budget and client patience allows it, absolutely. Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, like I get hired to do to bring out what they're envisioning, right? Like that's the whole purpose of them bringing me on board. So like I'm exhausting all my options I can while trying to keep their energy and their focus kind of intact. So yeah, I mean, and the great thing about Marcus is he's one of my best friends in the whole world, and he gets my process, and that's why I love working on his records, because like we'll do that. Like I think we spent a good hour getting tones for this after drums were up, after all the mics were up. I think I did swap the kick out, now that I'm thinking about it. We did this like 2.5 years ago, so you have to forgive my memory. But yeah, I think focusing on the recording side allows you to be more flexible in the mixing side and allows you to really use your tools effectively.
And following the question that Mr. Proma did, we know that narrow cues can lead to phase issues, and so would you go back and like every time that you change the narrow?
Yeah.
Go back?
So I sweep with a super narrow cue, right? Like I'm trying to find exactly the frequencies I don't like. We know it's hollow, we know it's weird, right? And then yeah, once I find it, I've kind of destroyed it. Now I'm kind of rounding back out my cue. I'm bringing my cue a little bit wider to get it to feel. And again, for me, that's all feel. How far I'm pushing that cue to widen it out is really just.
To avoid the phase issues, you would go back.
I'm not really concentrating too much on phasing issues. Your ears will let you know those kind of things pretty quickly. And you might not be like, oh, ding, phasing issue, but you're gonna know it sounds weird, right? So for me, it's all feel. Like everything I'm doing as a mix engineer is all feel based. So I'm not widening cues. I'm not cutting to precise, you know, I'm trying to get things to feel good. And so it's very, I don't want to say loose, but it's all, you know when you hit it. And that's why I love faders. Like I'll always mix with faders. Even mixing in the box, I still run a C24 because I'm a feel person. Like I need that final, those dBs mean a lot to me. You know, those little differences mean a lot. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific parametric EQ that you like to use for drums as opposed to maybe other instruments that you're recording?
I always use the SSL channel strips for my drums. They're by far my favorite. I learned how to record off of an SSL really. Like I really learned how to tone shape off of an SSL, so it's a comfort place for me. Okay. Yeah, so even working in the box, I'm using like the UAD SSL strips. I really like those. Yeah, I really like those a lot. That whole system allowed me to get rid of a lot of, like I had 2 outboard distressors I got rid of from going to that system.
And how different is the SSL plug-in? Well, okay, so Waves, UAD, and then the hardware. How different are those?
I mean, this will always be your best. Like it just, there's a feel in analog that I think digital is getting really close, and the UAD stuff, in my opinion, is the closest to it. Like that stuff sounds like the real pieces to me. I'm not a super big fan of the Waves stuff in general from their analog collection. Yeah, I think the UAD stuff blows it out of the water, personally. And there's some other really good, I mean, there's some small companies that are making some really killer ones too. So yeah. Okay, cool. Let's try and get the rest of the drums up real quick. So I'm going to kind of move through just so we can kind of get them up because I want to be able to do the parallel thing and yada yada. So I'll EQ the toms up, get them up. My overheads, I'm not really doing too much to. I did a lot of that work on the way in, so I might roll off a little bit of lows. I'm not going to compress my overheads. I want those to stay splashy. Plus, the whole goal with all of my drums is they're going to end up feeding into a drum bus, which I'm going to compress together anyway. So I rely on that to kind of glue my cymbals in there. Yeah, so I don't do a lot of that in there. My room mic I'm probably not going to touch. We're just going to use it as kind of like a natural reverb in there.
Splashiness is because your cymbals are only, are mainly getting picked up from the
Yeah, yeah, and he's only using crashes. Like this whole part, there's no ride work. There's no, there might be a little ride work. There's no hi-hat work for sure, except for open hat stuff. So it's meant to feel.
So that's why you kind of clipped a lot of it out because it didn't need a ton of sustain or a ton of ring. It's more
On the,
crashes.
I didn't change too much. The low end I cut out. Yeah, because I wanted the cymbals. And there's still, like if we listen to the overheads, you can still feel, I mean, there's something there. Oh. Right, there's still something there. Yeah, I've gotten rid of like, no, I've got it. What do I need it there for? You know what I mean? And now I've got control. And again, man, like I know I keep going back to this, but like that's because of the style of music this is, right? This only works here because we want that super tight rock kit. Metal would work in this similar kind of approach as well. Like, don't do this in jazz. Like, don't do this in like whatever. I mean, in classical, like yeah, this stuff would all be super out of place. So know where you're at. All right, cool. So let's work in the toms. Let's work in the overheads, and then I'll bring in the room mic, which we haven't actually heard in there yet. So like I can hear like here, I've got a lot of that gross this, that's gross, right? So let's cut all that out.
This is Tom 3.
This is Tom 2, he's only got 2. But yeah, this is floor tom, yeah, floor tom. So that's around 300 hertz. No, these are mids. Yeah, these are mids I'm pulling back. Right here's some more high mids, around like 800, 900. So I'm gonna pull that out a little bit and then widen out my Q. Again, I'm gonna add some top end just to kind of get a little punch, maybe around like 4K, 5K. And then I'm gonna add some low and a bell, right, probably around like 100. And we'll do this kind of across. So, right, so not as fwappy. So adding some top end into the overheads. It's too much. All right, cool. And then so the final piece is the room mic, which sounds super gross on its own, but you'll see when we pull it in a little bit. And I'm probably only gonna ride the fader up. Like if this helps from any kind of like a staging point, I know it's probably hard to see my faders, but my kick and my snare are more or less at near zero. My kick in and my snare top are more or less near zero. Toms are a good, I guess it looks like 9 dB lower from that, and my overheads are probably like 20 dB back from that. And my room mic, I'm probably gonna be at like, yeah, probably minus 45, something real small. I'm just trying to drive a little bit of a taste in there just to give some glue back into the tightness we've kind of achieved. So this is my room mic. So we're just gonna keep this open. I'm gonna roll off some lows. I'm just gonna take out everything below like 60 hertz. Maybe a little more. I don't want it to play with the phase relationship in my kick, which it will, because if you think about what's happening, this mic is I don't know, 20 feet away from my kick drum, right? So the phase difference is pretty big. And we're using that, right, in a way because that's how it sounds in the room. This room mic is literally what it is meant to be. It sounds like you were in the room, right? So that's what we're trying to achieve. And again, we're gonna blend this in just very slightly. So here's completely dry. And I'm gonna bring it in a little bit. So that's with a little bit in. I'm gonna pull it out. Right, my overheads open up a little bit more, right? That's without it. Everything just has a little bit less feel. My kicks feel processed, right? Here they feel a little more natural, right? So once we've done that, and I feel like I've gotten a pretty good overall mix with that, I'm a really big fan of doing a parallel bus on the drums. Okay, cool. Where I'm just going to compress the absolute living snot out of my drums. I'm going to get them crunchy. I'm going to get them sounding gross. And then I'm going to see how much I like it, is essentially kind of what we want. So I wanted a little bit of that dirt in this one, so I think I went a little bit crunchier than normal. So for this one, I'm just going to use a stock kind of Pro Tools one. I'm going to set my ratio pretty high, probably like 20 to 1 type of thing. I'm really trying to smash them. Yeah, my attack I want as quick as I can get it. I'm not trying to have any transients here, right? I'm trying to crush all that kind of stuff. My release is pretty slow. Yeah, let's just hear how that sounds. Like super gross, right? Not anything you'd ever actually want to hear. Sometimes what I'll do too, and I make this decision after I've kind of brought it back into my mix, is I might add EQ before or after that compressor. And if I am, I'm doing pretty extreme boosts of high and low end and cutting a lot of mids. And the idea being that I want my compressor, if I have it before, right? So if I boost all that stuff before my compressor, I'm accentuating all of this low end and all this top end. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like as you compress it, if I didn't do any of that, right, as I compress it, we're going to get real mid-range, which is fine. Not probably something I might be looking for with my drums. It might be if I feel like that's where I want to add that grit. I think in this, I'm going to end up liking that mid-range grit. And so pushing that up is cool for me. Adding it after your compressor can do the same thing, right? Once we've kind of glued together everything, we've got a bunch of that mid-range stuff we don't like, we can use an EQ to boost back up the lows and boost back up the highs. So it still feels good, but tighter. So where I play with that EQ before and after changes mix to mix. I'm never really super glued into one situation or one compressor. Sometimes I love the SSL compressor. Sometimes the low end gets a little like muddy and distorted, in which case I love like an API 2500 or something like that. So I'm really fluid with stuff, and I'm always just letting my ears dictate that works, that doesn't, type of thing. So here we'll just use this kind of stock guide, drive it in there. And we'll blend it in and see if we like it.
You're creating harmonics with
Totally.
this. Yeah.
So much distortion. Yeah, and like, that's the other side of things that we, my goal was to try to create an analog mix. But yeah, I mean, like on my snare drum especially, huge fan of adding a little bit of distortion in there, just to get a little bit of that crack. You can get away with it a little bit on your kick drums too, if your mid-range presence is lacking, but be careful there too, because distortion in a kick can do some gross things. Toms, I love a little bit of harmonic distortion on those as well too. Even like the stock Pro Tools, just that lo-fi guy is really, really cool in small, very small, tasteful amounts.
Are you setting every drum track to that compressor?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so if I was mixing in the box, what I'll usually end up doing is just doing like a parallel output. So I'm like sending out basically two places, like out to my main mix and then also into my parallel mix. It's no different than what I'm doing here, right? By just like using sends and trying to like recreate my mix off the board. In the box, it's nice though if you assign them all, because then as I'm changing my volumes, that relationship stays intact going into my bus.
So do you send them all to the same compressor, being that you want it to all sound sonically like a kit as a whole and not as much of a separation?
I mean, I'm trying to take all these things and I want to limit everything in there. I want to bring all of these drums that are all individually glued together, right? To an obnoxious amount, to a way non-pleasing, overbearing kind of thing. I'm trying to create that harmonic. I'm trying to create that little bit of distortion, that little bit of grit. Again, this difference, your room mic stuff, these are subtle, very, very subtle things we're using to just slowly inch up, right?
You're blending the dry drums with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so like I'm having, like, so on this channel over here is a fully, like that's what we're hearing here. Let me go back to, right, like that's on here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it out, bring my drums back in, and then just blend that track into it, right? So I'm gonna add a little top into that channel off the board. That's without it. You can feel everything feels a little bit looser. That's with it. So, like audibly we can hear a little bit of a jump, right? The beautiful thing about that is if you look at like a master meter, you're not really adding any more gain into your master track. If you're adding it in subtle enough mounts, you're not actually contributing more towards like, I mean, essentially like as a mix engineer, I feel like that's my strategies. I'm like in a battle against my master fader, right? Like I'm trying to get everything to live in its best light without creating new fake gain. And this is a great way to give your drums like a little pop without actually adding more gain. Yeah, I mean, if you looked at if like we were looking at a digital meter, like I'm not actually adding any more gain into my master fader by doing it. So I'm just kind of bringing up a little bit of that bottom, and they don't sound crunchy, right? You can't hear all that fake crunch, that nastiness we added in there. So it's like, cool, I can use this as a way to create harmonics, create new flavor. For me, the biggest thing I hear is the snare. Like the snare for me has a real nice jump to it. And so that's why I'm using that. So if you pull that out of the mix and like the room mic out, they feel almost to me like the feel of the drums is gone, right? Tonality wise, we're still listening to the same thing, but they don't feel complete like all that would do.
Unwanted frequencies from the get-go, you're not really raising anything to the master fader, being that none of those bad frequencies are coming through the mix, so you're pretty much boosting what you like but getting rid of what you don't like, therefore it kind of stays at that consistent level.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it's harder with drums EQ to get your outputs to match your inputs if you don't have like a designated like you know, like on whatever that plugin we were just using, like the stock Pro Tools one, you have an output trim you can work with, right? That's not always the case in like a lot of EQs. So like I might have a little bit more, like my meter might be a little hotter than it would be normally. But yeah, my goal is to try to get it back to the same. I want my inputs and outputs to match with EQ, with compressors, right? Then I know I'm comparing apples to apples, right? I know I'm listening to my mix. I'm listening to this sound exactly as it would be and exactly as it would not be with the EQ. And I've not added any of that gain that's going to trick my ears into thinking something's better when it's really not.
Just tone, no
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah, right. Only what the plugin has done to it, not adding loudness, right? Because your master, like, you know, as we get down to our master fader, we're going to compress this all together, right? Like even this, I'm going to use a bus compressor and re-glue again, right? We're just using compression in all these little stages in 1,000 different places as we kind of work our way into our master fader. And so the more we do that, the more life our master fader has. And now you've achieved loudness, glue, like continuity, like all of this stuff before you've actually had to bring in a limiter in any kind of way and like squash your mix, right? And so now doing it in all these incremental ways allows you to keep some of those dynamics intact without losing headroom. Yeah. And then as soon as your limiter would come in, if you didn't do all those little tiny notches, now you're never gonna feel your punch and your kick. Well, no headroom, but you're not gonna have any feel. You know what I mean? Like your limiter will kill that if you're relying on it to achieve your loudness, achieve your glue, right? Like my limiter at the end of my mix, like is literally there just to get it up to a volume that, you know, everyone else is gonna like. My mix isn't, I'm trying to make my mix not change once that final limiter comes in, right? So the only other thing I would do at this point would be try to just add a little bit of glue, which I guess we could do with the SSL bus compressor because it's there. And then, and then I'll play you back again the reference mix too. I'm curious, I actually printed my drum mix that I did all in the box, and so it'd be interesting to hear how it's a little bit different off the board. So yeah.
What we heard at the very beginning, that was before you did any changes to it. That was like
The
original reference.
No, that's with the in the box. This? Yeah, that's with the drums we mixed. That's the mix, essentially. Yeah, that's this track here, which is just the full song, essentially. So that's with like the drums I mixed in the box, worked in there. We can hear it with the stems for sure. So I printed one with the stems. These would be this is my in the box drum mix, which I already don't like as much. This lacks a lot of feel to me. That like, so we got some duplicate stuff going on here. Oh, there we go. What's that?
The new mix might sound even better.
I would hope so. I mean, I did this mix probably a year and a half ago, and I'd like to think I'm continuously getting a little bit better.
Well, I think you are.
Thanks. Yeah, so the bus compression would be the final kind of stage of that. And again, all I'm trying to achieve with that is I'm just trying to glue. So with this, I'm usually doing pretty slow, like really slow attack times. I'm not really trying to tame any transients here. I'm not trying to use it to go. I'm just trying to, again, glue together. So probably a slow attack time, quick release, and just trying to get my makeup game back to kind of where it was before.
When you say slow attack times for drums, are we saying more than 5 milliseconds, more than 10 milliseconds?
Yeah, I mean, those would be quick, right? 5-10 milliseconds would be pretty quick attack time. So like, you know, like on the SSL bus compressor, what, you have up to 30? Yeah, I'm probably going, 30 milliseconds, which is a slow one, right? To kind of glue it in. And then that's all going to be to taste, to what the music's doing, right? Like this is a pretty consistent pumping track, right? I don't really have to worry about the drums letting off ever, right? Where like dynamics would come back and I'm worrying about the release time as much as I might be in something where it's like more of a groove as opposed to just a straight pound, right? Like there's no let up here. Like no matter what I set that release time for, it's probably never actually gonna fully release because the next thing's gonna be coming in right after it, you know?
The lack of like direct mics on the or a direct mic on the crash makes the crash kind of feel like separate from the other drums, and it adds like that ambience, and I think that's really cool.
Oh, cool, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of with my overhead strategy with miking, it's definitely trying to just let those breathe. Compressed cymbals to me lose a lot of life, whereas I like compression, and you can see I like compression everywhere, right? I do it in so many small stages along the way in my mix, but that's like one thing I've always just like to like kind of let breathe.
Cymbals, you mean?
Yeah. I think it adds the kick and the snare end up being so tight that the cymbals allow a lot of life, and yeah, and like drums are such a dynamic thing, like in just naturally in their state, like the way they're supposed to be, right? And the way you feel them at concerts and stuff like that, right, is a lot more loose than we're used to hearing them on records. So for me, it kind of adds a little bit of that. Plus, this was meant to feel very live. Like, you know, we didn't listen to much of the first part of the track, but it is all super. It's all super digital. Everything is like really, like all the drum tones are super programmed. Right? Like those are fake kicks. When the snare comes in, it's all fake, you know? Right? And that's the feel up top was that. It was meant to feel very programmed. Exactly, and we did a whole, like, you know, coming into this point, we did a whole like blend up with the drums where they kind of like started in a reverb bus and then like the dries kind of blended in to kind of suck you into this live world, you know, type of thing. Like with the snare builds. Yeah. Yeah, it's like you're transitioning into this other world, you know? So they get dry and then they're just in your face, so. We played with dynamics a lot in that because they were really important to, we automated a lot of the dynamics there to create feeling, you know, that's kind of back in it. Yeah, so that's kind of a sped up process of more or less the process of which we would do. And again, live drums, program drums, two totally different strategies. If I brought in the stems for the front part, you would see me do a lot less of the carving. And in my digital drums, I'm not the EQ, the heavy EQ I'm applying here with the acoustic ones to really carve out those tones I don't like. I'm not doing as much of. The compression is super, super light. A dB, 2 dBs. I'm trying to tone shape more than I'm really trying to even out performance.
Is there any like concern with like this project specifically of like getting like the digital program drums to like sound similar to the live drums, or is it like a completely separate world?
We wanted the contrast in this one. We've done other records together, and if you look up some of his stuff, you'll definitely hear it where it's we'll layer in digital drums on top of the real ones to create like a weird hybrid-y type of thing. Here we wanted starkness. I wanted the drums up front to feel different than the drums on the back end, right? Like we were trying to make it very noticeable as far as like these are digital, these are live. Like there's your separation point. Yeah.
And what's the artist's name?
Marcus Allen Ward. Yeah.
Last question. I don't want to belabor it too long. We got time for maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll
Cool.
We'll get going. One question for me is, what was your ratio on your master bus?
Well, actually, we never even ended up dropping it in. My ratio probably light 2-to-1, 3-to-1. Yeah, I'm not trying to do anything crazy here. I mean, we can kick it in for sure. Your final bus compression on your drum bus is really vital for just bringing them together. That's the only group of instruments that I'll do, acoustic and electronic, that I'll compress together and then blend in with the rest of my tracks. I think, especially with the way music is now, we're used to hearing drums in a very specific light. And for me, I've always relied heavily on compression in small amounts to kind of fill stuff in that way to get a thicker tone.
How do you avoid getting lost up in like the decision-making process? Like the
Practice.
That's just
I swear, man. Yeah, like so I've been professionally mixing songs at this point for 10 years, and one of the reasons I love doing this more than anything else is I will always learn something new. Every single mix I will learn something new. So I think when you're starting off, just like have patience with yourself, that like that stuff comes with time. Like your ears will train. Seriously, I mean, it's so true. Like I would cringe listening to like early mixes of mine because my ears weren't there yet. And your ears are something you can train, like your biceps, right? Like you want big biceps, you go to the gym and you do a bunch of curls, right? If you want really great ears, like sit and listen and do it critically and listen to your stuff, listen to your favorite artist's stuff, and try and listen in different spaces, you know?
is it like, should you just like not be afraid of like making those
No.
commitments early on just to like learn from it?
Yeah, do it. I mean, work on records, man. That's the only thing you can do. And like, one of the best things I ever did in my career is like, I'm not really tied to a genre. So like, yeah, like, so I did this stuff for Marcus. Like, I'm gonna go from here and I'm literally doing a straight smooth R&B track.
You'll get a lot more work that way.
You will, but like also I love a lot of different styles of music, so for me it's familiar. But also like I'm learning things in a hip hop mix that I can apply to a jazz session that sounds crazy. So just, I think the more you can do, like the more you can do, the better you're gonna get. And in different genres, because you just learn how different sounds work together. And just give your ears time. It's not something you can really rush. It's just practice, man. It really, it's great to like sit in on classes like this. Like I love doing this stuff. I still love doing this stuff, and like picking other engineers' brains because everyone's got a different workflow, mentality, things they like to do, and it's just you'll slowly grab things from everybody and just piece it into your own style. Like the stuff I did, it's not rules. Like I didn't, you know what I mean? It's like stuff I've picked up from other engineers that I've liked. Yeah, I learned it. It was a trick I liked. I kept it, right? And move on. So hopefully you guys picked up a few things from this that you can add in that toolbox and bring back up. And I'm around. I'll be in Cleveland for the next until the end of July. So
He's leaving us.
yeah, I'm moving out to LA.
Yep.
Yeah, it's time. I've been in Cleveland my entire career, and it's been. I love being in Cleveland. I think it was a great to be here. It really honestly Cleveland's a great place to grow and learn your thing.
Is there a motivator to go to LA?
Yeah, I'm working on some stuff out there that it just is like I kind of need to be there. And to be quite honest, the opportunity out there is great. I'm mostly at this point a mixing engineer. I do some tracking, but I'm mostly mixing. And that world just kind of lives out there.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
Thanks.
thank you, Brad Puette.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you guys got a lot out of this. I did we've been doing this for a long time, and I got something from it. So next week is Chris Harris, Sync Licensing. If you look him up, his name is Chris B. Harris. Look him up. He has music everywhere.